Welcome back to Dark Night Scare, guys. Tonight, I'll be sharing 14 chilling true stories from Kentucky. Tales told by drivers on lonely roads, homeowners living by themselves, and people who dared to step into haunted houses. Encounters so strange, many still have no explanation. Before we get started, don't forget to subscribe, hit that like button, and share this with your friends. Drop a comment and let me know where you're watching from. Thank you. And now, let's begin. I was 29 when I took that cleaning job in Kentucky. I'd been living there for 6 months, maybe a little less. The only detail was that a realtor needed a house cleaned out before he could list it. He didn't mention that it had been sitting untouched for decades. I don't even think he knew. I agreed before I even saw the address, didn't ask questions. I was in that phase where anything that wasn't dramatic sounded good. After what I'd left behind, the idea of vacuuming spiderwebs in an old farmhouse sounded like a vacation. The house was supposed to be about 40 minutes outside Lexington, but it felt a lot farther once I got out there. I drove past the last gas station, then the last road sign, then onto gravel that felt like it was trying to shake my car apart. Eventually, even the gravel gave up, and I was bouncing along what barely counted as a track through grass that came up past my knees. That's when I saw it. The house sat half hidden behind a wall of trees. 2 stories, once white, now the kind of grey you get when nobody cares anymore. One shutter was missing. The others drooped like someone had tried to pull them off and given up halfway. There was no driveway, no mailbox, no sign anyone had touched it in years. I parked in the overgrowth, climbed out, and just stood there for a second staring. The trees were still too still. Not peaceful, just held the key. The guy gave me actually worked, which surprised me. The lock turned with this awful crunch, like something inside it didn't want to move. I stepped in, and instantly the air changed. It wasn't stale or moldy. It was dry. Bone dry still too. No buzzing, no fluttering wings, not even a breeze. Just the kind of silence that feels like you walked into a room in the middle of someone else's sentence. I closed the door behind me, habit I guess, and realized how dim it was. All the windows were covered with old newspaper taped directly to the glass, the kind that turns yellow and cracks at the edges. Some of them had dates. 1980, 7, 1991. Nothing more recent, nothing remotely modern. I set up my stuff near the door. Wipes, gloves, broom, a folding chair, and my Bluetooth speaker. Put on something light and dumb just to fill the space. The job was basic. Wipe surfaces, clear out cobwebs, make it look like someone had been through. No deep cleaning, no heavy lifting. I started with the front room. Couch with crushed velvet, all the cushions gone. Faced a brick fireplace stuffed full of old ash. Behind it, a warped mirror leaned against the wall. Probably fancy once. Now it didn't reflect right. Everything in it looked slightly off, like it was set half a second behind. The kitchen was worse. Appliances, as I couldn't even name. The cords on them were stiff and curled like dead snakes. The fridge wasn't plugged in, but the smell coming off it was immediate, heavy and sour. I wrapped a rag around my face and opened it anyway. What I saw didn't match what I expected. The inside wasn't just gross, it was streaked, thick, dark lines smeared across the back panel, and on the inside of the door, 5 deep gouges perfectly, spaced like someone with long nails had dragged their hand down really hard, like they were trying to dig their way out. I froze. My fingers hovered just above the marks. I didn't touch, didn't want to. They looked fresh. No rust, no fading. Just 5 clean, sharp grooves. I slammed the door shut and backed away. Took a second to breathe. My heart was kicking up a storm, but I didn't want to walk out right then. I needed the money. And honestly, part of me didn't want to feel stupid for getting spooked by a fridge. I moved on to the pantry. It was empty, thank God. Then aside, room with a broken bookshelf tipped over and a tiny plastic chair facing it like someone once tried to teach a kid in there. The chair was the kind of thing you see in preschools. Pink, cracked, still upright. I left the stairs for last. partly because I didn't want to go up, partly because I was pretending I'd missed them. By the time I had no choice, my speaker was dead. Not just paused, dead. No lights, no sound. It had been full when I got there. My phone said 68%, but no matter what I tried, it wouldn't connect. No Bluetooth, no data, just nothing. I pocketed it and grabbed the broom. The staircase was narrow and steep. No railing, just old wood. Each step felt like it might go out from under me. At the top, there were 3 doors. 2 open, 1 half closed. First room, empty bed frame, rusted. Closet door leaning into the room. The walls had thin cracks running like veins, all converging above the window. It looked like the wall had been punched from the inside. Second room, nursery, faded wallpaper. Ducks, suns, rainbows, all turned grey. Crib in the corner, tilted, hard to one side where a leg had split. I didn't want to look, but I peeked in. Empty, just splinters and dust. Last door halfway shut. I nudged it open with the broom. No noise, no squeak. It just swung inward. The room was bare. 1 rug in, the middle, oval, old, faded. Above it, 1 red handprint on the wall. It was too perfect. No drip, no smear. Just 1 flat open hand. Fingers spread, pressed there like a stamp. I stared at it longer than I should have. Told myself it was paint. I didn't believe it. I backed out. Broom first, went straight downstairs. Didn't clean the upstairs hallway. Didn't dust the railing. Just packed my bag, sat on the floor, and waited until it felt like late afternoon. Figured if I left too early, the realtor might call and ask why. I didn't want to lie. I also didn't want to explain. That was my mistake. Somewhere in there, I dozed off. Maybe for a minute, maybe more. When I opened my eyes, everything was black. Not the sun's down. Black. Suffocating black. Like someone poured ink over the world. No glow from the windows. No LED light from my phone. Just nothing. I reached for my phone, tapped it. Dead completely. I sat up slowly, every muscle tight. My back ached. The house was silent, not quiet. Silent. No creaks, no settling boards. Just the kind of stillness that feels aware of you. And then I heard it thud directly above me. Not a crash, not a bang, just 1 sharp, solid sound, like something heavy had landed on the floor of the nursery. I held my breath, waited, didn't move, didn't blink. Eventually, I stood, grabbed my bag, walked to the door, tried to open it. The knob turned, but the door wouldn't budge. I pushed harder 3 times. On the 3rd try, it gave, and I nearly fell out onto the porch. The night air hit me hot, but my arms were covered in goosebumps. My breath caught like I'd run a mile. I sprinted to the car, jumped in, hit the ignition, nothing. Once, twice, 3rd time. The engine roared, and that's when the porch light turned on. It hadn't been on when I arrived. I hadn't touched anything. There was no power, but now it was glowing, pale, and steady. Lit up the porch and I saw it. 2nd floor, middle window, a silhouette, still perfectly centered. No face, no features, just a figure standing exactly above the rug, watching. I reversed so hard I nearly tore the bumper off, backing through a fence post. Didn't stop until pavement was under my tires. I never called the realtor, never returned the key, left it in the glove box. Bram usually handled the long drives for our family, but this time the southbound trip through Kentucky fell to me. I started my routine as always, topped off fluids, logged tire pressure in my small pocket notebook, recorded the odometer reading, and locked in the GPS route, carefully avoiding construction zones. Everything proceeded without a hitch until my fuel gauge began its descent faster than expected. By the time I crossed into the next county, I was mentally calculating and wasn't pleased with the outcome. The GPS offered one option ahead: Dover Crossing, a place I'd never heard of. Its icon sat on a tiny side road, appearing to peel away from the highway like a loose thread. I dislike running the tank into reserve, so I made the turn. The road narrowed to a single strip of asphalt with grass edging both sides. No houses, no barns, just the GPS counter ticking down the distance. When it finally announced arrival, the map displayed a neat square, one store, 2 gas pumps, and 3 other buildings. And indeed, that was precisely what greeted me. Sufficient. I pulled up next to a pump and set the brake. A large paper sign on the card reader stated PAY inside only. I prefer paying at the pump to avoid small talk, but when the reader is broken, that's the rule. I went inside. The store felt as if someone had paused mid-shift. Flattened boxes were stacked behind the counter, a rack held local maps, and a corkboard by the door displayed a notice about proper tank grounding. The register sat ready, receipt tape loaded. There was no bell over the door, so no cheerful chime greeted my arrival. I called out, "Hello," and stood by the card terminal. I gave it a full minute. No one appeared. I walked the aisle. Still, no one. What I did find: a weekly schedule ending 2 months prior, a small safe under the counter with a keyhole taped over in blue, and a tray holding a handwritten note, "Cash only if card fails." The terminal itself was functioning correctly, so I swiped my card, entered 2 for my pump, and received an approved screen. Curiously, the receipt's timestamp was 2 minutes ahead of my watch. Not exactly a scandal, so I pocketed it and went back out. The gas flowed normally. While filling, I performed my usual check around the vehicle: tires, roof rack, rear hatch. It was then that I noticed my car was parked slightly askew. My tire tracks on the pavement didn't quite align with the old stains. Not worth losing. Sleep over. I finished, hung up the nozzle. The pump total didn't match my receipt, off by 38 cents. I decided the paper receipt was definitive and shrugged it off. I went back in for water. Everything seemed the same, except the steel door behind the counter. Earlier, it had an "out of service" sign. Now, nothing. The handle was tilted up, as if someone had just released it. I glanced at the floor in case the sign had fallen. Nope, I called out again, placed my items and the old receipt on the counter, and waited. Still, no one. I paid at the terminal and bagged my purchases myself. The corner cameras had cheap red plastic casings, the fake kind you can buy online, so I figured no one was watching. On my way out, I glanced at the corkboard again. Under the grounding notice, a second page was now pinned: emergency contacts. Just 3 first names: Rudy, Mina, Cart, with local area codes. I took a photo, thinking I'd email it to the owner later. Stepping outside, I saw my car and a man. He was standing right at my rear quarter panel. He wore a faded baseball cap, his jacket zipped to the neck, hands in his pockets. His stance seemed casual, but his eyes were fixed on my driver's door handle. I gave a slight nod. No response. He didn't move, just remained there, eyes fixed on the handle. I circled wide around the back of my car. I used my fob to unlock only the driver's door. So, I slipped in quickly, with my bag on my lap, and locked the doors. He shifted slightly, but didn't speak, didn't look at me now. His focus stayed on that handle. Then I noticed a reflection in the station's glass doors. Someone stood in the doorway inside. They hadn't been there moments before, just standing dead center in the threshold. The face, well, I won't dress it up, but it wasn't the slack look of a bored cashier. Something else. My pump number had changed. It was 2 when I arrived. Now the metal plate read 3. The other pump's plate read 2. They'd swapped. The bolts seemed solid. No visible swinging. I glanced at my GPS. It now showed the Dover Crossing station as an empty grey block. No station name, no road. I looked back up. The man by my car had turned toward the doorway. The person in the doorway hadn't moved, yet they were standing 1 tile over from where they'd been. The steel door behind the counter was slightly ajar. Now, through the gap, I could see a stairwell going down, something that didn't make sense given the building's apparent size on the map. I started the engine. The man remained stationary. I backed out slowly, steering clear of the pumps. In my mirrors, the person in the doorway had shifted by exactly one more tile. 4 orange wheel chocks had appeared at the edge of the lot, arranged in a perfect diamond, effectively narrowing the exit. I eased through without touching them. The GPS plotted a straight course to the highway, then blinked into a zigzag pattern of fake streets. The map rotated twice before locking in. I maintained a steady speed. Glancing back, the station looked exactly as it had. 2 pumps, the rectangular store, 3 buildings. Out front, the 2 figures stood the same distance apart, as if measured. A mile from the highway, I passed a handmade sign nailed to a post. Town office, it read, the arrow pointing away from my route. At the next bend, another sign. Church. That road should have dead-ended. My odometer ticked forward a tenth, then backward a tenth. I jotted it in my notebook, then stopped tracking. One more curve, and I passed a county truck parked by the shoulder. Hood up, empty cab. The license plate was taped over in blue, the same blue tape covering the safe in the store. Finally, the GPS settled, showing the ramp less than a mile away. One last glance in the mirror. Both figures were still there, maintaining that same gap. I passed a marker reading County Maintenance Limit, then another with the state road number. My phone lit up with delayed notifications. Calder runs the overnight courier route through central Kentucky, and I was halfway through my Friday run when things started to get off. I'd left Lexington with the van packed sealed totes, barcoded envelopes, running the same loop I'd driven so many times I barely looked at the GPS anymore. Farm supply in Versailles, clinic drop in Midway, courthouse box in Laurenburg, then the long stretch toward Harrisburg, manifest clip to the dash, scanner in the passenger seat, everything clicking along like clockwork until after mile marker 27, when I took a turn and saw a guy standing on the shoulder. Middle of nowhere, middle of the night, plaid shirt hanging open over a plain t-shirt. No bag, no car, no flashlight, hands just resting at his sides. He didn't wave me down or move out of the way, just stood there while I rolled past. Middle of nowhere, middle of the night. I told myself he must have stepped into the ditch. 10 minutes later, the low fuel light blinked on. My favorite station, the one that doesn't feel sketchy, was in Salvisa, so I figured I'd just hold speed and get there without pushing my luck. Dropped the van at the clinic. Scanner beeped. Back in the van. Next straight stretch, there he was again. Same plaid shirt, hanging open, same exact stillness. I slowed, thinking maybe I'd mistaken him for a fence post the first time. Number. He tilted his head just a little, like a half-hearted nod, and I could see his lips moving, but couldn't hear a thing through the glass. I kept going. A few miles. Later, at the crossroads outside Shawnee Run, I saw him a third time, this time on the far side of the intersection, facing right toward me. I actually hit the brakes harder than I meant to, felt the seatbelt catch, because there was no way. He'd walked here from the last spot. Still, I told myself the normal stuff. Plenty of people wear plaid shirts. Some folks wander at night. Drop the courthouse box. Contactless. Scan. Slot. Photo. Done. Manifest updated. Clock read 12:43 a.m. Pulled out, and there he was again. Same spot at that same crossroads I just left. No idea how. This time, instead of going straight, I turned right, hoping to loop out toward Ville. GPS redrew itself twice, then just stopped showing roads at all. Just my little arrow floating on a beige background, past a field with long rectangular sections marked by fence posts. Around the third post, movement caught my eye. A figure pacing the van from inside the fence line. Not running, not even walking. Just matching me step for step, like a treadmill. I sped up slightly. He sped up, slowed down. He slowed too, never looking at me. Fuel gauge suddenly dropped a bar. Flat road, so that shouldn't happen. Decided I'd stop anywhere lit with a working pump. Pulled into a church lot I've used before. Killed the engine. Started counting my remaining deliveries. Looked up, and there were 3 knuckle prints on the driver's window, perfectly spaced, mid-height. I checked mirrors. Lot, road, nothing. Out loud, I said, "I'm not opening that because saying it makes it easier to actually follow the rule." Back on the road. And somehow I was back at Shawnee Run again. Same signs, same dented mailbox, same man. Head tilted that tiny bit. I chose straight, aiming for Salvisa. Ended up on a stretch lined with barbed wire. Same pacing figure in the field. Fence post started repeating like the land had been copy-pasted. Finally, Salvisa's lone lit gas station appeared. Pulled up to pump 2, swiped card, heard the click. Gas started flowing. Honestly, the relief was more about having something normal to measure 12 gallons. Exactly what I expected. Went inside for a drink. Came back out to a trail of wet shoe prints leading from my rear van door into the dark between pumps. Definitely. Not my tread pattern. Checked the back. Everything sealed. Barcodes intact. Inside, the clerk asked if I was running the county loop this late. I said yes. He slid the receipt across and tapped it. Time read 1:22 a.m. My dash clock said 12:58. Phone matched the dash. Asked about the time and he pointed to their security monitor. On the edge of the frame by my van's rear door, plaid shirt guy, hands at his sides, head tilted. I turned around. Lot was empty. Looked back. Monitor showed nothing. Glitch. The clerk said like he sees weird stuff all the time and can't be bothered. Left the station. GPS kept trying to send me back to that crossroads. Barn one side caved in showed up on my right. 7 minutes later, same barn again. No turns. Started marking X's on my wrist every time I saw it. 3 X's before I reached another gas station where the pump only worked after I reparked. I called. State police. First call dropped instantly with no log. Second went through, but the guy said my location didn't match any tower red. I gave him landmarks, the barn, the dented mailbox. He told me not to stop for anyone. I told him that was already my plan. Next, straight away pacing figure again, rolled the passenger window down a crack. Asked if he needed help. No reaction. Told him I could call someone. Still, nothing. Dropped an envelope at the vet clinic. Took the photo. Timestamp was 4 minutes ahead of reality. As I turned back, the clinic's glass door was propped open a few inches, even though it had been latched. I closed it, checked the handle secure. Photo time suddenly matched my dash again. I'd had enough. Decided to cut the loop short and take the interstate. But the on-ramp was past that same cursed crossroads. And of course, there he was. This time, standing dead center on the yellow line. I slowed to a crawl, leaned out. "Move," I said. He didn't. "Move." Just said, "You're late." Voice flat, like he was taking attendance. "For what?" I asked. "You missed." "Missed what?" "Left." Head tilt toward the county road I'd been avoiding all night. Against my better judgment, I turned left. Narrow road between fenced parcels. Numbers on gates jumped around like someone had shuffled them. Trip meter ticked backward once. Scanner in the seat pinged on its own, said delivered 1. Then delivered 0, check totes. Everything sealed. Shut it off. He appeared again by a field entrance. Same stance, same tiny hand shift. I got out. Door. Open. "Tell me where you want to go." "I'll flag a deputy. You're late. Then catch me up." "You miss left." "Left where?" Tiny tilt toward a gravel lane, barely wide enough for the van. "Not happening." I told him you already did. I got back in. Decided. I was done with whatever this was. Straight to the interstate. Didn't look into the fields. I never planned to go near the place, let alone step inside. But a friend of mine, Mark, passed my name to a local realtor who needed someone with a camera and a flexible schedule. Colby, the realtor, was polite but definitely nervous on the phone. He said the house had belonged to a man who died. No will, no next of kin, no paperwork. It was technically owned by the county now, and they were planning to auction it off. Before that, they needed pictures of the inside for legal reasons. Colby made it clear he had no intention of going past the front step. Said he tried once and didn't like the way it felt. That was his whole explanation. I figured it was just talk. Rural real estate agents can be a strange bunch, and half of them act like every barn and cabin is cursed just to add mystery. Still, he offered me double, my usual rate. All I had to do was spend an hour or two inside, take wide shots of each room, and upload the files to a Dropbox folder. It sounded simple. I said yes. The house was about 15 minutes off any real road, sitting in the middle of a wide open field, with nothing around it. No other houses, no barns, no fences, just grass, dirt, and this sagging structure in the center, like something dropped there by accident. From a distance, it looked like 5 different buildings had been glued together by someone with no tools and no sense of proportion. Parts leaned. The roof lines didn't match. It had 3 types of siding: faded wood slats, dented aluminum, and something that might have once been green, but now looked like mildew had won. And here's what stuck with me even before things got weird. The front door didn't face the road, not even close. It opened toward a flat patch of grass, as if the house had spun around at some point and everyone just left it that way. When I pulled up, someone was already waiting. Ellis. Not with the realtor, just a guy Colby hired to unlock the door and make sure I didn't steal anything. Funny, in hindsight, there was nothing in that place worth stealing. Ellis looked like the kind of man who took odd jobs to avoid interacting with people. Tall, wiry, grey stubble, denim jacket in 90-degree heat. He didn't say much when I walked up, just nodded, jingled the keys like a warning, unlocked the door without looking inside, then walked back to his truck and leaned on the hood. Asked, "You're not coming in?" he said. "Not unless someone pays me triple." End of conversation, so I stepped in alone. The air hit me first. It wasn't stale like most abandoned places. No mustiness, no rot, just unmoving, thick, like it had been trapped inside the walls for too long. No dust, just a cold, settled feeling that made the hair on my arms lift. The front room was a mess, but not from damage, more like confusion. All the furniture had been pushed against one wall: a couch, 2 chairs, a lamp without a shade, what might have been a record cabinet. Nothing overturned, just lined up as if someone was preparing for a flood. I took a few photos, adjusting my settings, trying to treat it like any other job. The next room was worse. A dining area with 2 tables, 1 round and 1 rectangular, jammed end to end. No chairs, a single painting on the wall, slightly crooked. A landscape, but the brushstrokes looked angry, like the artist stopped caring halfway through. I kept moving. Some doors led into short hallways, but most didn't go anywhere. 2 ended in bare walls. 1 opened into what might have been a pantry, except it was just a deep closet with no shelves. I documented it all, and then I found the hallway. This one was different, longer. It stretched far too long for the house's footprint, easily 40 or 45 feet, which was impossible. From outside, that side of the house was only about 30 feet deep, but the hallway didn't care. It was narrow, plain, and ended in a single closed door. I walked toward it, my footsteps echoing faintly, and opened it. Inside was a bedroom, no windows, 1 iron bed frame against the far wall, no mattress, but marks in the floorboards showed where one had been. The air felt cooler, but not fresher, like a basement where the insulation's failing. Across the room was another door. I figured it led to a closet or a side room. It didn't. It opened onto another hallway. Same length, same floor creaks, same slight tilt in the ceiling light. I turned back. The room behind me was still the same. So I moved forward, door after door, hallway after hallway. By the 3rd or 4th, I knew it wasn't a loop. I was going deeper. The changes were subtle, but real. A light switch a little more crooked, a warped floorboard under my foot, a new crack in the drywall. At one point, I turned to retrace my steps and froze. The hallway behind me looked identical to the one ahead. No markers, no shifts. I picked a direction and walked. By the sixth hallway, the changes weren't subtle. One doorknob was warm, not sun-warmed, hand-warmed. I pressed my palm against it and felt the heat like someone had just let go. I stood there for a long time listening. Nothing. No wind. No footsteps. No creaks inside the walls. The seventh door brought me back to the same bedroom. At least it looked the same. Same frame, same floor. But my camera bag, which I'd set on the bed earlier, was gone. In its place was a different camera, an older model, heavier, covered in dust. And sticking out of the back was a single photo halfway ejected from the slot. I pulled it out. It was a picture of me from behind over my left shoulder, standing exactly where I was in that moment. I didn't flip it over, didn't want to see if anything was written. My legs felt like rubber bands, like I'd been running without moving. I dropped the camera, didn't even think, just dropped it and walked fast toward the door. This time, it didn't lead to another hallway. It led to the entryway. The front door was wide open. Ellis was still there, standing in the field holding my camera bag in one hand. No expression, no movement, just waiting. He didn't speak, just held the bag out. I took it, nodded, got in my car, and didn't check the map until I'd driven 10 miles and my GPS came back. The job came from Riven, someone I hadn't talked to in years. He'd been friends with my cousin in high school. Back then, we'd hung out a few times, mostly at bonfires and basement parties, but we'd never been close. So when I got his message, out of the blue, it was a surprise. He said he knew about some side work through an old connection, clearing out a house near Harrodsburg. The owners were out of the picture. Just needed someone to haul out the junk so the place could be sold. Pretty simple, he'd said. No one else wants to drive out there. That probably should have told me something, but I needed the money and my rent was already late, so I told him I'd take it. I didn't ask too many questions, just got the address and directions. No GPS out there and drove in my truck with the windows down. The static on the radio grew louder the farther I got from town. By the time I reached the place, it was almost 4 in the afternoon. The driveway was cracked like dried out skin, weeds sprouting through the splits, brushing against the undercarriage as I pulled in. The house was set back from the road, half swallowed by tall grass and overgrown trees. 2 stories, grey paint, peeling in long strips. The porch slouched to one side, like it had given up trying to stay level. There wasn't a car in sight, no welcome committee, no lock gate or sign of life. Just the house sitting there like it had been waiting for someone. The front door was already slightly open. I cut the engine and sat for a second with my hands still, on the wheel. I wasn't nervous yet, just alert. That feeling you get when something is off, but you can't explain why. Still, I got out, walked up the steps carefully. Some boards groaned like they were ready to give way and called out, "Hey Riven, send me." Nothing, no echo, no rustling, no creaking upstairs, just silence, thick enough that even my breath sounded out of place. Inside, the air was warm and stale, like it hadn't moved in years. Furniture was draped in those stiff old sheets that always seemed more like shrouds than covers. Some had slipped off. One arm of a recliner stuck out, twisted at an odd angle, like it had been dragged and left. Light came through the blinds, thin and pale, barely reaching the corners. Everything smelled dry, like dust, wood rot, and something metallic underneath it all. I noticed markings on the walls as I passed the living room. At first they looked like smudges, like someone had been wiping grime away in circles. Then I saw they were 2 regular loops, overlapping, layered, like someone had been tracing the same pattern over and over with their finger. I tried not to look too long. The whole house had that feeling like it didn't want to be looked at too closely. I started with the recliner. It was heavier than I expected, and dragging it made a long, uneven scraping sound that echoed off the walls. Next was a half-rotted bookshelf, awkward to move. Every movement sounded too loud, like the house was listening. By the time I'd moved a few pieces to the porch, I was sweating and trying to breathe shallow. I checked my phone. No bars. I sighed and looked up. The front door was shut. I hadn't touched it. I walked over and put my hand on the knob. It felt wrong. Not just cold. It was slick. Oily. Like it had been dipped in something that shouldn't be there. I jerked my hand back and wiped it on my jeans without thinking. When I turned back, the hallway was different. It had turned left. I was sure of it. Now it curved off to the right. I stood there for a second trying to make sense of it. I even tilted my head, like maybe I'd gotten turned around, but the furniture was still where I'd left it, only the hallway had flipped. Maybe I'm overtired, I muttered, but my body didn't believe it. Every muscle was tense, like I was waiting to be hit. Still, I went back in. I wasn't about to drive 2 hours home with nothing to show for it. I headed toward the dining room and grabbed the table. As I lifted one end, I glanced at the window and froze. It showed the backyard. Only I was sure this room had faced the front yard before. The driveway. Now it showed trees, the same dead pines from the other side. I set the table down real gentle. That was the moment I stopped trying to rationalize it. Something was wrong here, and it wasn't just me being tired or stressed. The walls shifted when I wasn't looking. The rooms moved, and then I saw the footprints. They were faint in the dust, small bare feet like a kid's, maybe 6 or 7 years old. Not fresh, but overlapping mine, which didn't make sense. I hadn't seen them before. They led into a hallway. I hadn't gone down. One that hadn't been there earlier. I followed them. They stopped at a door under the staircase, one I hadn't noticed when I came in. Rusted hinges, fresh marks where nails had been pulled out. I don't know why I opened it. My hand just moved. Behind it, a staircase led down. Not like a normal basement. Staircase. Narrow, steep, too steep. The walls closed in on either side, like walking down into a throat. I stepped slowly, feeling each board shift. The air was cold and flat, like it had never been breathed. At the bottom, a hallway stretched out, too long, longer than the house could hold. At the end stood a little girl, white dress, pale skin, completely still. She didn't speak, didn't move, just stood in the shadow like she'd been waiting. I blinked. She was gone. And in her place, something else stood, taller, human, shaped, but bent wrong, like it had been cooked and left to cool, in the wrong position. Its skin was blackened and cracked like burnt paper. Where I should have been, there was just absence. It didn't move, but I did. I turned and ran. Hallways branched in directions that hadn't existed. My mind went blank. I slipped on the steps, hit the wall, caught myself, and kept going. I burst into what might have been the entryway. Only now the front door opened into a solid wall. I slammed my fist into it. The drywall cracked, then broke. Behind it, wood etched with those same looping symbols. Hundreds, maybe thousands. Some carved fresh, some still wet. Then came the knocking. Slow, deliberate. 1, 2, 3, 4. I didn't wait for a fifth. I ran to the nearest window and threw myself through it. Glass sliced my arm inside, but I barely felt it. I landed in dried grass and broken branches, rolled and got to my feet. I sprinted for the truck. It wasn't where I'd parked it. It was turned around facing the house like it had driven itself. I didn't care. I jumped in, jammed the key in the ignition, and floored it. The tires spun, then caught. The trees felt closer now, like they'd moved while I wasn't looking. I didn't slow until I hit the main road. 30 miles later, I pulled into a gas station and sat there, engine running, trying to breathe. A couple of years ago, I and my pops decided to go on a road trip. It was very out of the blue, I was not even expecting it, but I decided to go anyway. It would be some solid father-son bonding time. After driving for what seemed like a couple of hours, probably was around 8 or 9 p.m. At the time, we pulled up into this gas station for snacks, water, and used the bathroom. We went back inside our car. Keep in mind, this gas station is basically in the middle of nowhere, Kentucky. Anyways, we got back into our car and decided to look for a hotel, but there didn't seem to be any around, and I mean not even one anywhere near us. My dad was tired, and so is I, so we just decided to sleep in the car. We pulled up into this sort of rest stop area parking lot type of deal and decided to try to get some sleep. My dad fell fast asleep, but I was on my phone for a couple of hours. It was probably around 11 p.m. I just felt suffocated by the tense air and decided to step out. For a bit, I felt safe because the gas station was fairly well lit, and in sight there was a couple of trucks that would occasionally drive by, so I felt at ease. At the time, I was also texting my friend who lives in Seattle, Washington. We were on the phone for a little bit, then I saw what looked like a large cornfield. I had never actually seen a cornfield in real life at that point, so I decided to cross the road and get a closer look, and that is what I did. I walked extremely close and started feeling like I was being watched. But again, I just thought, well, you're literally outside in the dark, standing next to a tall cornfield, of course you're feeling this way, so I brushed it off. I even considered going in, but then I thought, why would I even do that? So anyway, I just decided to step back, and then I noticed what looked like a barn. A large white barn with red, maybe black strips. It was kind of hard to tell in the dark, but what I could tell you for sure that it was definitely a barn. I was stupid and young, and this happened maybe when I was 14 or 15. So out of curiosity, I decided just to check it out. The barn was next to the cornfield, sort of tucked in a little bit. I literally thought, I wish I could see something that would freak me out as a joke, because I never really thought anything would happen, and I loved being scared. Anyways, I started making my way towards the barn, getting closer and closer, and I remember very vividly that I was not wearing any socks because I had just put on slides. I remember the dirt rubbing against my toes while I walked. I remember sending pictures to my friends in Washington, jokingly saying I saw something and that I was going to check it out. As I got closer though, unironically, I saw something behind the barn, but sort of to the side, like how when someone appears from a corner. I thought it was a bell. Literally, I assumed it was a bell attached to the corner of the barn. So I just walked closer. Even as I'm writing this, I can feel the goosebumps rising on my skin. I walked closer and saw the head of something or someone just peering over the corner at me. And at that moment, I just straight froze. My fight or flight was out of function because there was literally someone or something peering at me from a corner. After about 5 or 10 seconds, the noise Snapchat makes when you get a notification snapped me out of it, and I just ran as fast as I could. I crossed the road to my dad's car and got in. I felt the sense of relief wash over my body, and somehow, my dad never woke up. Me gasping for air was not enough to wake him up from his deep sleep. I really considered waking him up and telling him we just had to leave, and telling him I saw someone, but I assumed he would think I was joking or having an episode, which sounds dumb. But he has never really believed in anything paranormal or anything. That's out of the ordinary. I took deep breaths and just texted my friend, telling them what happened. I don't think they believed me. I do not blame them though, and I will not blame any of you either. Sometimes I have a hard time believing what I saw, but I know it was real. I was sober and fully aware, but from the bottom of my heart that perhaps disturbs me the most is that whatever was peering at me from around the corner was very tall easily. 7 to 8 feet, and every time I think about this, I get a sense of dread and paranoia. I have not told any family or my dad, but if any of you have any clue of what it might have been, please let me know. Again, I was not hallucinating. This was long before I knew what psychedelics or drugs were in general. But yes, please let me know if you have any ideas or info. So this was one of the creepiest and angriest moments of my entire life. The job came through a mutual contact, a couple heading to New Mexico for a week, needing someone to look after their border collie, Rook, and keep the house running. The pay was decent. I was between jobs, and they seemed like reasonable people, so I agreed. Their place was deep in Wythe County, Virginia. The highway narrowed from 2 lanes down to a twisting strip of cracked asphalt where you hoped not to meet anyone coming the other way. By the time I reached the black mailbox with their name taped under plastic, my phone screen was frozen. The driveway stretched nearly a quarter mile through open pasture before ending at a large white 2-story house. They were friendly, the type who apologized for poor reception as if it were their fault personally. They gave me the basic instructions. Feed Rook twice a day. Keep the wood stove stocked. Bring in the mail. If a package arrived, sign for it. The locks were old but usable, and a spare key was hanging on a nail in the mudroom. They showed me the breaker box, the water shutoff, and the pump switch in the cellar. There weren't close neighbors, just 2 farms visible across the pasture. They left after dark, their taillights disappearing down the gravel road, and it was just me and Rook. That first evening, I fed Rook and took him for a walk up the driveway to get a feel for the place. The fields were fenced, the grass tall and still. On the way back, I saw him. A man was on the driveway about 30 yards ahead, walking toward the road. He wore a camo jacket and mud-colored boots, his head angled low. The gravel crunched under his steps, but he never looked at me, never slowed, just walked dead center down the drive until he disappeared around the bend in the trees. It didn't add up. The driveway wasn't shared. It ran from the road directly to the house. If he'd been on the road, I would have seen him earlier, which meant he must have come from the direction of the house. I gripped Rook's leash tighter, got him inside, and locked the door. Then I stood at the upstairs window for nearly an hour, staring at the strip of gravel disappearing into the darkness. I told myself maybe he was a hunter who had crossed without realizing, but my chest remained tight. The next day was quiet. I didn't walk. I didn't even open the curtains facing the driveway. By evening, I decided to settle in. The enclosed back porch had an old wood stove, so I lit a small fire. The smell of dry oak filled the air, and Rook sprawled beside me. For an hour, the crackle of the fire and Rook's slow breathing made the house feel almost normal. Eventually, Rook went inside, and I stayed by the stove to tend the fire. Close to midnight, Rook's barking ripped through the quiet. It was sharp, fast bursts that made my arms tingle. I left the stove burning and ran inside, following the sound upstairs. He was in the spare bedroom at the far end of the hall, planted in the middle of the floor, facing the closet. His body was stiff, tail tucked. Another sharp bark echoed off the walls. The closet door was shut, but the wood frame had shifted over time, leaving a thin, uneven gap along the edge. I moved closer, looking through that narrow space. Something looked back, an eye level with mine, unmoving, catching the faintest light. I slammed the door hard enough to make the hangers rattle. When I grabbed Rook's collar to pull him out, he yelped, but I didn't stop. We tore down the stairs, out the front door, and into my car. By the time I hit the gravel drive, my hands were shaking so badly I could barely keep the headlights straight. I drove until I got service, then called 911. The deputies met me back at the house. They searched everything: closets, attic, basement, under the porch. No one was there. No footprints in the yard. No signs of forced entry. One of them asked if maybe I was tired. I wasn't tired. I stayed at a motel that night. When I returned, in the morning, accompanied by one of the deputies, I noticed things I hadn't seen before. The woodpile on the porch was 2 logs short, although I hadn't lit a fire upstairs. The bowls I'd arranged in the kitchen were shifted. The water dish a finger's width forward, the food bowl moved to the side. The spare key that had hung on the nail in the mudroom was on the floor directly. Beneath it, teeth down as if it had been dropped straight without bouncing. We found nothing else amiss. I almost convinced myself I had imagined the man on the driveway and the eye in the closet until the 3rd night. I decided to keep a notepad on the kitchen counter, jotting down every small anomaly. Mail count, wood count, setting all clocks to the same time. Before bed, I'd align everything precisely. Bowls, shoes, even the remote on the arm of the couch. Around 2 a.m., I woke to silence. Rook wasn't on the rug. My shoes, which I'd left toes out by the bedroom door, were now toes in, exactly half, a shoe length closer to the threshold. Downstairs, the kitchen chairs were slightly pulled away from the table, each by a different amount, as if someone had brushed past them. The mail from earlier was still there, except for one envelope, which was missing. I didn't sleep again that night. The next day, the missing envelope was back, placed neatly on top of the pile. No one had come by that I could see. Later that afternoon, a delivery driver asked if the other helper still needed the package. I told him I was the only one here. He frowned, said a man in a cap had signed for something 2 days ago, then shrugged and gave me the box. I mentioned the extra stat and the hazard cooler exception during intake at the lab. That evening, I walked Rook to the bend in the lane. I counted 127 steps to the curve. On the way back, I counted again. This time, it was 134 steps to the same spot. When we reached the porch, the screwdriver I'd left flat on the rail as a marker was standing upright, perfectly balanced in the crack of the wood. I placed it back flat. That night, I secured every door, wedged a chair under the mudroom knob, and kept the spare key in my pocket. It was near midnight when Rook barked again. The same sharp bursts, the same urgency. He was upstairs in the far room facing the closet. The gap in the door frame was just enough to see through, and I stared. Back. I didn't think I slammed the door, but I felt it jump in the frame and I pulled Rook out of the room. We went straight down the stairs, through the mudroom, shoving the chair aside and out the back door. I locked it behind us without looking. Up. We crossed the yard quickly. I opened the back car door, put Rook inside, and got behind the wheel. I didn't stop driving until the signal bars returned on my phone. The property manager handed me a single brass key and a photocopied map. Someone had penciled a square near a curve in a gravel road outside Pine Hollow, West Virginia. I signed for the pickup, checked the start time, and headed out with contractor, bags, a broom, a short pry bar, and my cousin Tyler's old work gloves stuffed in my back pocket. The job was simple enough. Clear out an old tobacco barn, sort the junk by type, take some photos, lock up. The gate was chained between two crooked posts. I parked off to the side, then paced it from my truck's bumper to the barn doors. 30 steps, heel to toe. I jotted 30 in the margin of the work order just to keep track if anything changed later. The padlock needed a second twist before it clicked open. The doors dragged through packed dirt when I pulled them wide. I set my clipboard on an empty feed bin right inside and made a plan. Something I picked up at a warehouse job years ago. 3 piles, 1 aisle, rope and cloth in the left bay, trash down the center, metal in the right. I labeled 3 contractor bags with masking tape, big block letters so I could see them from anywhere in the room. The only thing I noted but didn't touch was the ladder under the loft opening. I wrote, "Ladder, intact, no action," and circled it. The first half hour was clean and routine. Fill a bag, haul it to the doorway, carry it to the truck, come back. The same way. I marked each trip with a tally on the feed bin and on my clipboard. After 5 loads, nothing weird. On the 6th load back in, the clipboard was on the bottom rung of the ladder. I didn't like surprises on a job that only paid for labor. I put it back on the feed bin and set a coil of wire on top so it couldn't wander. I even wrote it down. Clipboard relocated to ladder rung unknown. Then I kept working. 2 trips later, the clipboard was lying dead center under the loft opening. The wire coil hadn't moved. I didn't write that one down. I just told myself I must have absent-mindedly moved it and doubled down on sticking to my routine. I started counting my steps again both ways. 30 out, 26 back, 31. Next time I underlined pace count, inconsistent on the margin. When I remeasured from the gate to the doors, I got 28. Measured again, 30. I made myself write it neutrally. Repeat counts vary cause unknown. No point wasting time debating with distances. I started chalk marking the floor, small X's under every object before I moved it, then another line to cross it out once I was done. If anything came back, I'd see it. Near the back wall, I pulled a crate and found 3 sealed envelopes taped underneath. Those went in the save pile for the manager with the pry bar laid across them so they couldn't slide. When I came back from the truck, the pry bar was there, but the envelopes weren't T. Checked the trash, the metal pile, nothing. On a hunch, I walked to the truck. The 3 envelopes were standing upright on the tailgate like they were posing for a picture. I locked them in the glove compartment. When I got back inside, the ladder wasn't leaning anymore. It was standing upright under the loft opening. No scuffs or drag marks on the floor. I wrote, "Ladder upright, likely bumped," even though I hadn't felt any bump. A few minutes later, my gloves disappeared from the feed bin while I was testing the edge of a rusty tin. Found them neatly folded on the 5th rung of the ladder, fingers pointing toward the aisle. I put them on and noted gloves found on rung 5. I wanted proof, not just a list of weird things. So I measured the loft opening. First time 48 inches both ways. Second time 46.5 x 49. Third time back to 48 x 48. I pressed the tape hook hard into the wood and counted ladder rungs. 10. Top rail flush with the opening. When I climbed to the 3rd rung for a better angle, 2 hands rose over the top rail from the loft side. Palms down, fingers curled tight, a thin scar across the right thumb. They didn't move. They didn't shake. They just stayed there until I lowered the tape, then slid away in one smooth motion. I stepped down without turning my back. Wrote 2 hands on top rail duration several seconds. Then I scratched out unidentified hands. No commentary, just description. I called the property manager. "Any other keys out?" I asked. "Just yours," he said. "You don't need to go in the loft. Clear what you can reach and leave the rest." Copy. After that, I stuck to a tighter process, marking my tallies in a rectangle so I'd know if they shifted, photographing before and after shots from the same spot on the floor, chalking in batches of 5. Even so, the tallies vanished between trips. Photos came back with timestamps from the future or 40 minutes in the past. My phone clock jumped back and forth before settling. I stopped taking pictures. In the tool room, I found a coil of baling wire, moved it to the doorway, then came back to find it still on the shelf. I brought it out again. Now I had 2 identical coils. I tied them together and wrote duplicate coil. The chalk marks started changing extra X's I hadn't made. Some shifted inches away. One crate's diagonal line reversed like it had rotated without scratching the floor. When I drew a second line to make an X, I came back later to find only the original diagonal. No smudges, no explanation. Outside, I ate a granola bar at the tailgate to create a natural pause. Tyler texted he might swing by. I told him to wait at the gate. I timed 2 minutes with my watch. When I flipped my phone over, I had a missed call from a time that hadn't happened yet, and a black photo I hadn't taken. I deleted it. I forced the job toward the finish. Anything that wouldn't stay put. I moved closer to the door. When I set the broom by the threshold, it somehow ended up standing on its own under the loft opening. It wouldn't balance there when I tried. But if I set it under the loft and stepped away, it stayed upright. I set my phone to record it. Left for the truck and got 15 paces out, 22 back. Tyler's truck was at the gate. When I blinked, he was at his tailgate. Even though there were no tracks between, the phone had saved nothing but a still image of the broom lying on the floor, time-stamped 2 minutes ahead. The broom was upright again until I picked up the phone. Then it fell. That's when I decided, if one more measurement changed a 3rd time, I'd stop. The loft opening was back to 48 x 48. The ladder rails 2 inches thick, 10 rungs. I moved it between 2 chalk outlines, waited, and found it hadn't moved. But now there were 4 fingertip-shaped scuffs on the top rail. I carried my last trash bag to the door, noticed it felt wrong, and opened it. Inside were Tyler's gloves. I looked at my hands. I was already wearing Tyler's gloves. Both pairs had the same scuffs, same stitched initial. I locked them in the truck. When I came back, all my chalk lines had been swept into a neat little rectangle by the feed bin. The extra coil was back in the tool room, like it had never left. Outside, Tyler called through the gate that he'd be late if I needed him. I told him 20 minutes, looked up again. He was leaning on my tailgate, studying the map inside my truck, even though the passenger door was closed. I swept a path to the door with my handbrush. The clipboard was gone from the feed bin. It was sitting on the 5th rung of the ladder, same as the gloves earlier. I slid it under my arm and lifted the ladder to move it to the wall. 2 hands appeared again over the top rail, palms flat this time. No wrists, no arms, just steady hands. They stayed there until I stopped moving, then slid away. I finished up without experiments. At the door, I checked once. Left bay cleared, right bay, stacked, center aisle open. The chalk rectangle still boxed the space where the tallies used to be. The clipboard stayed under my arm. Outside, the gate chain was hooked differently than when I'd arrived. I fixed it. Tyler asked if I needed help. I told him I was done. I closed the barn doors, locked them, tugged once to make sure, and walked straight. I dropped the brass key in the work order in the office box and left. The house sat about 3 miles outside Linwood, a tiny Kentucky town hardly worth a pit stop. 1 gas station, 1 diner with a drooping neon sign. That was it. You could drive through the whole place in under 5 minutes, provided you weren't stuck behind a farm truck. The listing had been online for months, its white paint peeled in long, curling strips. The porch sagged as if it were barely keeping itself upright, like it was trying to let out a slow, exhausted sigh. Every time I looked, the asking price had dropped a bit more. Ads like that usually signaled trouble. Locals murmured about it at the bait shop or the feed mill. That place again. Someone would say, "Good luck with that." But I wasn't superstitious. I figured they were just timid. Trouble meant haunted, sure, but haunted could mean a bargain. I signed the papers in early March. It was a fresh spring weekend. All that stood between me and a project I could renovate or maybe move into was tall grass and peeling paint. I told myself a week should be enough. Patch the floors, clean the place, maybe haul a few things in and sleep there one night. I didn't want to drive into town every day. That drive felt like a commitment I wasn't ready for. My first walkthrough, the air felt strange, stagnant, like the house had been holding its breath for years. Not foul, just dry and stale. You could taste it on your tongue. I didn't unpack more than a couple of toolboxes. I wanted to see the bones first. The kitchen floor was where I started. I scrubbed hard enough to feel the strain in my arms. It was the kind of clean where the cloth picks up grit you didn't even know was there. Then came the shift upstairs, like a small sigh as floorboards rearranged themselves. I paused, sponge in hand, listening. Old houses do that, I told myself, settling. But when it happened again, in the same spot, with the same soft groan, I brushed off a shiver. The third time, I stopped scrubbing. My heart thudded in my chest. The familiar pattern and the sound made my skin crawl, like those videos that tell you to listen closely for maximum creep. I stood still, breathing slowly, hoping it was just drywall or dust, but nothing followed. Silence spread through the old kitchen. I decided I wouldn't sleep upstairs. The boards were warped, and my gut said no. The downstairs bedroom became my base. I rolled out the sleeping bag, stacked the toolboxes in the corner, and shut the door. It felt absurd, but also like I'd claimed a little ground. The first night didn't go well. Around midnight, the sharp tap of a knuckle on the floor woke me right above my head. It was sudden, like someone testing. I gripped the mattress tighter. No panic, just a quiet focus. I lay still, breath steady. 2 minutes passed, then came another tap. Same spot. I didn't move. Didn't think I could. Finally, I forced myself out of the bag and crawled toward the door, bare feet pressing into the cold wood, flashlight in hand. I stepped outside. I scanned the second-story windows. All dark, except one, the one above my room. My beam hit it dead on. Shine. Flash gone. No figure. Just dark old glass reflecting my light like a mirror. I dismissed it as nerves, but I didn't sleep much after that. Day 2, I spent hauling debris and sweeping. I kept the radio on, playing country music to fill the silence. But at night, it got worse. Not just taps anymore. Small thuds and something dragging, slow, deliberate, heavy, like furniture being moved inch by inch. I told myself I'd deal with it in the morning. I refused to go up the stairs. That's when my tools started moving. A hammer I left on the kitchen counter turned up on the front stoop, neatly propped against the door. A box of nails I'd stacked by the back door appeared upstairs, balanced on the landing. I hadn't walked up there in 2 days. I told myself I must have carried it up without realizing, but every nerve said otherwise. I started spending more time outside in the daylight, clearing leaves, prying nails loose. In the fading afternoon light, the place almost looked harmless, but the nights grew heavier. The second night, the thuds became footsteps, slow, deliberate. Creak, 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 each, one closer to the stairs. I held my breath. My legs felt hollow. The sound stopped just short of the steps. Then silence, not the restful kind, dense, pressing. The fridge gave a single hum. Then nothing. The air felt heavy. I pressed my palms to my legs, trying to will them to move. Then came the scrape, soft, slow, like something large being pushed across wood. The drag echoed, long enough to feel long, finally thud, deep, heavy enough to jolt the light fixture in the hallway. It swayed gently. I heard nothing else. No hum, no breeze. Just that light moving like it was tired. I dropped the pry bar. It clanged against the floor. Then I ran for the front door. I didn't stop until I was inside my truck. I looked back. Once across the patchy yard lit by the headlights. One upstairs window stood wide open, the same one I had sealed shut the day I arrived. I was 27 when I agreed to help my friend Mason photograph an old farmhouse outside a tiny town called Clay Ridge, Kentucky. I had just changed jobs and had a strange stretch of free time. When he texted asking if I wanted to tag along and help, carry gear for a couple $100, I didn't ask too many questions. He told me the house was being bought by an out-of-state developer who needed before pictures ahead of renovations. It sounded simple. An afternoon in a dusty, run-down place, then food, then back home. We left late in the morning in Mason's SUV. The first hour was all freeway. Then it changed. Smaller roads, less traffic, more trees. By the time we hit Clay Ridge, it felt like we'd driven into a pocket of time. A few rundown stores, one gas station, and not much else. The place looked frozen in the 1980s. We stopped for drinks and asked the cashier if he knew the property. He just blinked at Mason and muttered something about old land before ringing us up. Cool. Great start. The GPS led us out past town onto endless back roads flanked by fields that looked more like overgrown yards than farms. We passed rusted tractors, collapsed sheds, and patches of forest pressing right up against the road. In some spots, the branches scraped the car, unless you drove perfectly centered in the lane. I kept checking my phone for signal, not because I had anyone to text, just because it felt better knowing I could. The directions ended at a narrow gravel drive half hidden by weeds. No mailbox, no gate, just a path that looked more like a deer trail than a driveway. We slowed to a crawl, tires crunching over loose stone. Tree branches tapped the windshield like they were trying to get our attention. Then the trees opened up. There it was. The house stood dead center in a small clearing as if it had been waiting for us. 2 stories. Pale siding that might have been yellow once now faded to bone white. The roof sagged to one side. The porch looked soft enough to fall through, but it still held together. No power lines, no satellite dish, just a lonely structure cut off from everything. We parked, got out. It was quiet. Too quiet. Not country quiet, where you hear wind or bugs. This was flat quiet, like the clearing was on mute. Mason didn't say anything. He just opened the hatch and started pulling gear. The porch groaned under us, but held. When Mason turned the knob, the door opened without resistance. Inside, I expected dust and cobwebs, maybe signs of raccoons. Instead, it looked like someone had stepped out a minute ago. Furniture upright, cushions neat, a coat hanging on the back of a chair. In the kitchen, dishes sat in a rack drying clean. Polished brown leather shoes were lined up by the door, toes pointed outward, and no dust. Not anywhere. Not on the mantel, the baseboards, or under the table. It didn't feel abandoned. It felt paused, like the house was holding its breath. I followed Mason into the parlor and started unloading. A wide archway opened to a narrow staircase curling up to the second floor. The banister was intact, the steps scuffed, but not rotting. I turned toward the hall to grab another bag. When I looked back, the staircase was gone, and in its place was a smooth white wall, fresh plaster, seamless, like it had always been there. I touched it, solid. I stepped back, my heart thudding in a slow, uneven rhythm. I called Mason over, keeping my voice steady. He glanced at the wall, then at me and said, "Probably just another room," but his eyes said otherwise. I went back toward the entryway. From that angle, the stairs were there again. Same lean, same railing. Back into the parlor, gone. Just the wall. Mason gave a half laugh. Old house weirdness. We moved to the kitchen to start shooting. He set up his tripod. I opened a cupboard to clear the space. No plates, just letters. Dozens of bundles, each tied with brittle string. The envelopes were yellowed and handwritten, all addressed to Evelyn Hayes. The postmarks ranged from the 1920s to last year. One even had a forever stamp. The tightness in my chest returned like someone had hooked a hand under my ribs and was pulling upward. I closed the cupboard gently. Leaning against the counter, I tried to process it. Then came the sound. 2 slow, heavy steps from above. Not creaks, not shifting beams. Real steps, deliberate, weighted. I looked up. The kitchen ceiling was unfinished in spots, open beams visible, but the sound came from the solid part where nothing should be above it. Mason heard it too. His eyes were locked on the ceiling. We didn't speak, repacked quickly, heading back toward the front door. I reached for it only to find another wall, fresh plaster, cold, seamless. We tried every door. The kitchen led to a hallway we hadn't seen before. It curved into a den, then back into the parlor. Every path looped us back to the same place. Then the stairs were there again, and halfway down stood a woman. She was perfectly still, hands folded at her waist. A long grey dress reached her ankles. Her eyes tracked us without blinking. Her face was calm, too calm. Mason whispered something I couldn't catch. We bolted straight toward her. The air thickened as we passed, heavy like water. I brushed her dress. It was cold, damp. The door was there this time, real. We hit the porch, the steps, the car. Mason fumbled the keys but started the engine. Gravel sprayed behind us as we sped away. We haven't talked about that farmhouse since. I was 29 when I signed on to watch over an old Kentucky estate for a few nights. Technically, I was the overnight caretaker while the regular crew was away. It sounded simple enough. Unlock a few rooms, do some rounds, jot down any oddities. My first task that evening felt harmless. Unlock the back parlor for a caretaker tour. I thought, easy. And I walked in with a casual step. The place was called Holloway. Not Holly Place or Ridge House, just Holloway, no easy charm. Imagine an austere, Early 1800s mansion planted among smoky blue ridges. The kind that looks carved from the mountain and left to watch over the valley. I had a clipboard, a loose floor plan, a flashlight, and a walkie tucked on my belt. That was all I needed. Or so I told myself. The moment I crossed the threshold, everything felt quietly off. Not alarm screech off, just that low-frequency strain that lingers in your bones when something doesn't fit. Right away, I turned right, intending to walk down the hallway to the library, but it didn't lead where I expected. The wall curved gently. I thought it might be my imagination, and suddenly, I was stepping toward a pantry. No, library. I froze in the doorway and scanned the printed floor plan again. Did I memorize it wrong? No. That hallway shouldn't have been there. I shrugged it off with a small smile. Old houses do strange things under footsteps. Each room carried that heaviness, the kind where the air tastes old, like wood sealed under layers of time. Dust draped everything. I remember breathing it in, the fibers settling on my tongue, clinging to the back of my throat. I should have heard creaks or distant noises, whispering steps, floorboards groaning. But there was nothing. No children's laughter hiding around corners, no disembodied voices, just wrongness. Quiet, thick wrongness that seemed to settle deeper into my ribs with every careful breath. On night one, after unlocking that back parlor, I made my way up the main staircase to check the back windows. Routine stuff, but halfway up, one step dipped just a little under my foot. I stumbled, reached out, tapped it solid. I shrugged and kept going, flashlight beams scissoring through the dark. Then it stuttered, flickered once like a lazy, half-hearted blink. My stomach sank. At the top of the landing sat a heavy portrait. A woman in a dress from another century, hair high, expression flat. I didn't want to look at it, but I glanced, anyway. Later, when the beam of my flashlight steadied, I looked again. Her eyes seemed to have shifted. Not a full movement, just enough to make me pause. My breath caught. I moved on. Night 2. I was looking for a missing pan in the kitchen when the pantry swallowed the light. I'd left the overhead bulb on. Must have then. Flick, click. Darkness. Brief, but enough to unravel my nerve. I remember the whisper, not words, not structured, a hushed breathing, maybe a sibilant scheme of sound that wrapped around me. My heart thumped. I stepped back, knocking over a broom, rattling metal against floorboards. I don't remember putting it upright again. By the third night, I was logging things in a logbook, mostly mundane stuff, timestamps, patterns I thought, I imagined. Then something bolder happened. The basement door, which I'd always latched from the inside and locked when I came up, was ajar. I always latched it from the inside and locked it when I came up. This time it was open. I promise I didn't touch it. I dropped a pen inside the frame just to leave a marker, proof that I noticed. Later, when I returned, it wasn't where I had left it. It was perched upright on the handle from the inside. Tall angle. Impossible to balance like that. I stared. There was no one else there. I found the pen later in the wine cellar. Another room I had barely glanced into. It sat on a shelf in plain sight, as if someone had placed it there. I stood, a strange thrill running through me. Okay, I thought. Now we're playing. Night 4. I open my log and reread. Nothing special, just dry entries, times, lights, creaks. Then, in my own neat handwriting, I found a new line. She's watching. I frowned because I didn't write that. I would have remembered. The words hit me like a cold sigh in my ear. The 5th night, I tried to leave early. No drama planned. Just punch my time, unlock the front door, get in my car, and go. But instead of the front door, there was no door. Only brick. Solid brick. No hinges, no plaster dust, just wall. I pressed my palm against it, heart thudding, and the wall pulsed slightly, or I pulsed into it. I couldn't tell. I panicked. Raced upstairs, tried the parlor windows. Nothing outside but void. Not hill after hill. Not velvet black sky. Flat, endless emptiness. I stared. My hands trembled. Then the crackle of my walkie erupted through static. My voice came through, hissing, looping. Door, gone over and over. I wasn't touching it. I stood frozen, the signal fading into static, wondering which part of me was speaking. Night 6. I swallowed whatever protest I had left and went to the basement again. I felt like a moth drawn to a bare bulb. The door was off its hinge, swaying. I pushed it inward. A hum, slow and low, filled the stairwell, vibrating against my bones. I followed it, past the furnace, past storage crates, into a corner I had never seen. Stone walls moist with condensation. Behind an ancient boiler carved into the masonry was a tiny alcove, no bigger than a shoebox. Deep inside sat a leather-bound book, tied with fraying cord. I slipped closer. The leather cracked with age. I reached in, but my fingers, for reasons I still can't explain, betrayed me. They didn't grip. It was like my body didn't belong to me. My confidence snapped and I pulled back. When I got out, my logbook lay open on the hall table. Fresh ink on the page. Let the house remember. Same slanted handwriting, not mine. Night 7. I found myself in the front parlor again. The tape-mended mirror caught my eye. The glass was broken, held together just to keep the shards from falling. I stared at its reflection. The room looked pristine, sunlight pouring in. Furniture perfectly arranged. No bricked-in walls, no patched hallways. It was morning, the way the place should have been. I pressed a finger to the glass, warmer than anything should be. Not warm from sunlight, a living warmth. And then I stepped forward without thinking and walked inside. Last April, my girlfriend and I decided to go for a little drive around the hills and mountains of eastern Kentucky at night. I know, bad decision, but we were really bored for reference. I am a 6'3" 370-pound male. My girlfriend is 5 foot and pretty tiny. However, we have both been firefighters for about 5 years now, so we are both very strong and don't normally get very frightened. So anyway, we decided to go for a little drive at night. We are driving around this back road through the mountains in my little white Mercury Sable, because I'm a badass, with a grandma car, obviously. And we are coming around this little bend in the middle of the road, is what I think is a school bus, like it's straight up in the middle of the road. Its back tires were completely flat and the back windows were broken out, and so were one of the taillights, deciding that that was too creepy to stick around for. I drove around it. All of the windows on the left side of the bus were completely shatter glass all over the road. At this point, my girlfriend has a death grip on my arm, and we are both freaking the heck out as I get around it. I look in the mirror and slammed on the gas in my rearview mirror. On the hood of the bus was a man smiling at us with a gun in his lap as we drove by. I'm absolutely too terrified to speak, so I just motion to my girlfriend to look in the mirror, and she screams as we take off. This was in the middle of the night, in the middle of nowhere, Kentucky, on a mountain road. We hadn't passed a house in miles. It was downright eerie, but I thought it was over just some weirdo. I was wrong. We get back onto the main road and go to a gas station to get a drink and figure out what the hell just happened. Obviously, I refused to let my girlfriend go anywhere by herself at the gas station because it was poorly lit, and we were still freaked out. We'd go inside, get her drinks, and come back out. Sitting on the hood of my car was the same man that was sitting on the school bus, except without the gun this time. So like I said, I'm a fairly big guy, and I really don't like when people scare my girlfriend. So I walked up to him and told him in not so nice terms to get off my car. He smiled at me, and while still looking at me and smiling, he said to my girlfriend, "Hey there, darling. What are you doing, this ugly Yankee?" My girlfriend, being from New Jersey, absolutely went off on this guy, screaming about how she's a Yankee, and I'm more attractive than he would ever be, etc., etc. This guy is still smiling at me, and he smells like dip. He's got bits of dip in his teeth when she finishes. He still stares at me, and smiles and says, "Hey honey, you come home with me. I've got a surprise for you at this point." I'm furious, and I grab the guy and throw him off my car. That's when he moves between me and my girlfriend, which is not okay. He turns, and when he starts muttering, "I'll have to get rid of the ugly Yankee first." Yes, but what tool to use? I have so many that would work. I'm seriously angry by this point, and as he started talking to my girlfriend, I just absolutely lost it. I can feel the anger rising. I hear my girlfriend start crying. I shoved him out of the way and grabbed her, opened the car door for her and locked it. Jumped in my side and turned the car on. This guy sat on the hood of my car and started smiling at me again. He started saying something along the lines of using a hatchet to dispose of. The ugly Yankee, that's when I threw the car in reverse and drove away. He fell off the front of the car into the ground but never stopped smiling. We drove home in terrified silence. To this day, nothing really makes any sense. Don't drive through the mountains of Kentucky at night, and if you do and see a school bus, just drive away quickly and don't look back. This happened about a year ago on a camping trip to Kentucky in the winter. My girlfriend at the time and 3 of my buddies spent the long weekend doing some hiking and camping. We drove in on a Friday night around midnight and set up camp. There was almost no one else at this campsite, besides a young couple a bit down the road from us, and an older man down the road the other way. We unloaded the cars in the dark, got the headlamps out, and started setting up the tents. Suddenly, my girlfriend noticed that there was an extra person amongst us. It was the young woman from the couple at the campsite down the road. She looked really messed up. Her eyes were glazed and her skin looked like she had been picking at it constantly. She introduced herself and spoke in a sort of monotonous way. Overall, she seemed nice, but it was her boyfriend or maybe husband who really creeped us out. We noticed after talking with her for a bit that he was standing near our campsite at the edge of the woods, just staring at us. Eventually, he went back to their campsite, but then got his car and pulled up right next to us with the high beams on. As you can imagine, getting blasted by high beams at midnight in the middle of the woods really impairs your ability to see. His girlfriend said she had to go and got into the car with him. At this point, we were all weirded out but not entirely freaked out. It was later in the night when things got scary. I was in the tent with my girlfriend when I started to hear a domestic argument from a couple down the road. It soon escalated to full-on screaming. Then I heard glass breaking. At this point, my girlfriend and I were sitting up and deciding if we should do something or not. I hear someone get into the car. The car then peels out of the campsite and races down the dirt road past our campsite, kicking up dirt and gravel against the side of our tent. The guy had apparently left his girlfriend at the campsite because we could hear her sobbing. My girlfriend and I started getting dressed so we could check out the situation, but the car comes peeling back up the road and parks back at the campsite. Loud, panicked shouting ensues, and we hear 2 clear pops of what sounded like gunshots. I distinctly remember the feeling of blood draining from my face. My girlfriend and I are basically frozen in our tent. Listening finally, to our great relief, we hear them both start arguing again. The argument settles down by about 4 in the morning and we fall asleep. When we woke up, they were gone. I asked my buddies if they heard what happened, and they said it kept them up as well. We made a pretty great breakfast and started packing up when the older man from the trailer we walked past in the beginning started chatting with us. He seemed surprised that my girlfriend was with me and said something along the lines of, "You shouldn't have brought her. It's not safe for women out here." We were officially creeped out, and we found a new area of the state park to stay. We found a lovely lakeside campsite the next night and enjoyed the rest of our trip, but we were certainly jarred by those encounters.